Rome was in chaos. The Emperor Caligula had been killed by the Praetorian Guard. The Senate killed his wife and daughter. The Senate didn't know which they wanted to do. They either wanted to do away with the Roman Empire, bring back the Roman Republic, or one of them would become the next emperor. Whichever way, they needed to kill Claudius. He was the last remaining heir of the line of Augustus. Well, Claudius knew what was coming. He was in the palace, so he hid behind some thick curtains, hoping they wouldn't find him. Suddenly the curtain was pulled back by one of the Praetorian guards. Claudius fell to his knees and started begging for his life. Claudius had been born a weak and sickly child with mysterious disabilities. When he got older, he walked with a limp. He stuttered and stammered. His head twitched in funny ways. He was partially deaf, and he drooled. His right side was weaker than the rest, and sometimes he would just fall down because of that. And when he got excited, he would slobber, and his nose would run. His mother said that he wasn't finished, that he was only half started by Mother Nature. His grandmother wouldn't even talk to him, but sent him harsh notes. His family, when they had meals together, they would throw food at him and mock him and make fun of his disabilities. When it came time for him to have a tutor, they hired a farmer mule trainer. He beat him constantly. He was convinced that he could beat this disability out of Claudius, that it was just a result of him being lazy and not really giving full effort. One day, Augustus noticed Claudius's love for reading. He thought of a new plan. He hired a scholarly historian to become his tutor. He brought him stacks of books and assigned him reading. He developed his writing skills, which means he could write books. He worked on speeches and taught him how to give them. It turned out that he wasn't an idiot after all, but he was intellectual, had great insights, a natural-born academic. His family finally came around to accepting his strengths. They still said, though, he should never be involved in politics. He should not be in the public eye, which was fine with Claudius. He decided to become a historian, just like his tutor. And he wrote books for the rest of his life. Many of them were on the Roman history. Well, when his nephew, Caligula, became the emperor, he thought it'd be fun to make Claudius a member of the government. Then he treated him like a court jester, making fun of him and doing strange things and making him do strange things. Because of the stress and anguish he had during the reign of Caligula, he became weak and sickly again. Caligula then sent his two sisters into exile because they were plotting to, they were a part of a conspiracy to have him assassinated. One of them was Agrippina. She was heartbroken because she was being separated from her son. She thought she would never see him again. Suddenly, the Praetorian Guard executed the man that they were supposed to be protecting. They were just tired of his silliness and craziness. Then they found out that the Senate was thinking about doing away with the Roman Empire, bringing back the Roman Republic, which means it didn't have any more emperors. Well, their only job was to protect the emperor. If they didn't have one, they wouldn't have their status and their position. They realized they needed to quickly find a substitute for Caligula, preferably someone who was weak and someone they could manipulate easily. No one really knows when Agrippa got involved in this whole process, but it stands to reason that he reminded the guard about Claudius, who was the last remaining male heir of Augustus. Well, when they thought about Claudius, it sounded like just who they were looking for. But they realized making him emperor would be a three-step process. One, they'd have to find him. Two, they would have to protect him. And three, they would have to somehow convince the Senate that this weak man should become their emperor. Well, Agrippa said that he could take care of the first one. Since he was Claudius's childhood buddy and friend, they knew all the hiding places in the palace. The guard said that it was their job to protect so they could take care of number two. As far as the third one, how to convince the Senate, well, they came up with a plan. It started off with Agrippa leading a guardsman to the palace. And when he pulled back the curtain, Claudius fell to the ground, begging for his life. But then he looked up and saw that the guard had bowed to him and was proclaiming that he was the next emperor. They rushed him off to the Praetorian camp to keep him safe. When the Senate, as they were arguing over what to do next, suddenly they heard that the Praetorian Guard had declared that Claudius was the next emperor. They immediately called him to come here so they could sort this thing out. Agrippa advised Claudius, don't go to the Senate. They will kill you. We have a plan, and the plan is for me to go to the Senate. Well, he did go to the Senate, and they gave him an audience. He explained to them how that Claudius was the last living heir, male heir, of Augustus. He went on to explain that no matter what you personally think of the man, we all know that he's mature. At 44 years old, he's not a kid like Caligula was. And we all know that he is an intellect, and he is and he's a good organizer, and he has character. He concluded his speech by pointing out that the Praetorian Guard had surrounded the Senate, fully expecting that they would make Claudius the next emperor. Well, hearing that, and since they didn't have any other plan, they agreed, and Claudius became the next emperor of Rome. Little did they know that he would be as great as Augustus himself. History would go down to rank him as one of the best emperors to ever serve Rome. First thing Claudius did was give a general amnesty towards those that were a part of assassinating Caligula. He then rewarded Herod Agrippa by giving him the rest of Judea to rule over. That meant that his kingdom was as great as Herod the Great. Herod Agrippa would be known as Herod Agrippa I. Then Claudius brought back Caligula's two sisters from exile. He reunited Agrippina and her son, and then found a wealthy man to marry her who could easily support her and her son. Well, the first little bit of Claudius' rule was not very pleasant. The people were shocked when they found out who the Senate had made their emperor. Still, with his reputation and his obvious lack of experience, he proved to be an able and efficient administrator. He produced a productive government, mainly because he passed a law saying that freedmen could serve in the government. Freedmen were those who used to be slaves. And up to that point, they weren't allowed to serve in the government. They did an excellent job, and they were very faithful to Claudius. He also personally oversaw the building of roads, bridges, aqueducts, tunnels, and canals. He then reestablished the strong Roman economy, bringing finances back into shape, even though Caligula had wasted it. And he was known as a man who loved justice. Sometimes he would just go to the court and observe the judgment that was going on there. At times, he would even serve as a judge. It was a little bit frustrating for some of them because he didn't always go by the law. He also relied on his insights and instincts to pass judgment. Well, even though everything went really good, still there were those who tried to assassinate him. It was almost a weekly occurrence. They figured since he was weak and frail that he could be easily assassinated, but he wasn't. He put to death over 300 people who tried to assassinate him. Well, he was missing one thing that he needed, and that was a military victory. All the emperors had military experience and often victories. He needed one because he had no military experience at all. He finally decided that he would go after the biggest prize of all, conquering Britain. Even Julius Caesar had invaded Britain twice, but failed both times. He put together an army of 40,000 soldiers, along with war elephants and war machines, and he invaded Britain. He personally oversaw the invasion. Even though he didn't have military experience, he had written extensively Roman history, which included the wars and the tactics that generals used. He used these in Britain with great success. Even though the local tribes fought against the Romans the best they could, they were no match for the Roman army and his brilliant strategies. The general who was in charge of the whole thing allowed Claudius to lead the last and most decisive battle of the war. The victory over Britain, bringing them into the empire, brought him popularity and prestige. It was also good for both countries. By having Britain, Rome had a vast amount of natural resources, gold and silver and tin, as well as trade. The British had a common language now, and technology and culture. And the Romans built roads and bridges and towns. Well, overall, Claudius ruled with distinction. He was known for ruling in moderation, in sanity. He was known as a good man, kind, dignified. Agrippa also ruled well. He now controlled all of Judea. And Herod Agrippa loved the people and they loved him. He did a lot of good things for the nation. He rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. He expanded the empire. He expanded the kingdom. He brought peace with surrounding nations. And he did many good things. And even though he himself wasn't fully Jewish, the law said that the king should read the Torah in the temple. They asked Herod Agrippa to come and read the Torah in the temple, even though he wasn't Jewish. As he was reading Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 15, he came to the part that said that you're not to have a foreigner rule over you as king. When he read that, he stopped. Tears welled up in his eyes. The people shouted, Agrippa, don't be afraid. You're our brother. You're our brother. They loved this man, and he ruled well. He found out that the Jews didn't like the Christians. So he arrested the apostle James and had him executed. Oh, this pleased the people immensely. So he arrested the apostle Peter. Couldn't execute him yet because there was a festival going on. He was going to wait till afterwards. But as you'll read in Acts chapter 12, during the festival, the angel came and brought him out of prison. The next morning, when Herod Agrippa saw that they were missing his prized prisoner, he had the guards executed. He would have gone and found Peter again, except he had to go to Caesarea to settle with a meeting with the people from Tyre and Sidon. While he was there, he gave a speech in the early morning. He wore his royal robes, which was covered with silver. And as the morning sun rose and shone against his robes, they shone out in brilliance. With his eloquent speech and with the brilliant robes, they were amazed, and they yelled out, "This is not the voice of a man. This is the voice of a God." Herod knew he should have stopped them right there, told them not to say that. But he liked the sound of it, and he accepted it. He then looked and he saw an owl. First time he saw one was when he was in Tiberius's prison. He thought it was a good omen. And sure enough, he did get out of prison. But now he knew this owl was an indication that God was about to judge him. And he fell to the ground. They carried him back to Jerusalem and laid him on his bed in the palace. He lay there for 7 days. The people were outside mourning and praying and crying. They prayed to God to have mercy on him and let their king live. But after 7 days, he died. 3 of his children are mentioned in Scripture. Drusilla was married to Felix, the governor who oversaw the trial of Paul. Felix, by the way, was one of those freed men. He had been a slave at one time. Also, another son was Agrippa II, who also was at a different trial of Paul, and his sister, Bernice. Well, Claudius ruled well. The people prospered. He brought about reforms to the empire. And history would go down to rate him as one of the best rulers that Rome ever had. But there was one area that he wasn't very good at: selecting a wife. His first 3 wives were unfaithful to him, openly immoral. He divorced the first 2. His third wife, while he was still emperor and he was on a trip, she openly married one of her lovers in a public ceremony. It was their plan to kill Claudius and take over the empire. Well, he came back and had her executed with her lover. It was then suggested that possibly he should marry his niece, Agrippina. Her husband had died, and she had inherited his wealth. history indicates that she probably killed him. Well, their marriage did not go over well with the Roman people. They did not approve at all. They felt that Agrippina was making a power play so that her son would become the next emperor. And right enough, in time, she asked her husband if he would adopt her son, Nero. After that, some time went by, and then she asked her husband if her son could marry his daughter. And he agreed. Finally, she asked if Nero could be a co-heir with his natural-born son, who wasn't yet old enough to rule. He agreed. You think that he would have caught on what was going on here. And eventually he did. He openly mourned his decision to marry the 4 wives that he did. He kept talking about the character of his own son and what a good emperor he would make. Far better than his adopted son, Nero. Agrippina saw what was coming. She had to act quick before Claudius' son was emperor. They say it was probably because she had an affair with the food taster that she convinced him to substitute some poison mushrooms for the good ones. And shortly afterwards, Claudius died. And Nero became emperor. In time, Agrippina realized her mistake. He come to realize that Claudius's natural-born son would have made a much better emperor than her own son, Nero. But I'll tell you more about that in the next story.